The chrome of his Harley gleamed under the harsh afternoon sun as Jake Reaper Morrison pulled into the gas station on the outskirts of Phoenix. His leather cut bore the patches of a lifetime, a skull with flames. The words Hell's Angels arched proudly across his broad shoulders. At 6'3", with a scarred face and arms covered in ink, Jake was the kind of man parents warned their children about. The kind of man who made people cross the street. The kind of man who had long ago accepted that fear was the only thing he inspired in strangers. He'd been riding for 16 hours straight, running from nothing and heading nowhere in particular, which was exactly how he liked it. The rumble of his bike was the only companion he needed, the only thing that drowned out memories he'd rather forget. As he dismounted and stretched his aching muscles, he barely noticed the small figure watching him from beside the air pump. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with tangled blonde hair and a face smudged with dirt. Her pink sneakers were scuffed and too small. Her jeans had holes in the knees that didn't look fashionable but necessary, while other customers gave Jake a wide berth, deliberately avoiding eye contact as they hurried to their vehicles. This little girl stood perfectly still, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Jake tried to ignore her as he filled his tank, but he could feel her eyes boring into him. When he finally looked up, she was standing right there, barely reaching his waist, her small fists clenched at her sides. He'd faced down rival gangs, done time in places that broke stronger men, but something about this kid's unwavering stare unsettled him in a way nothing else could. "You look mean," she said matter-of-factly, her voice clear and surprisingly steady. Jake grunted, replacing the gas nozzle. "That's the idea, kid. Now run along!" But she didn't move. Instead, she took a step closer. "Are you mean, though? Or do you just look mean?" He squinted down at her, trying to figure out her angle. In his world, people always had an angle. "What's it to you?" "Because I need help," she said simply. "And nobody else will listen to me." Jake glanced around the gas station parking lot, looking for a parent or guardian who should be watching this kid. The place was busy with the usual afternoon traffic. Families loading up minivans, truckers grabbing coffee, a young couple arguing by the convenience store entrance. Nobody seemed to be looking for a lost child. Nobody seemed to notice her at all. "Where's your mom?" he asked, his voice gruffer than he intended. The girl's face crumpled slightly before she caught herself. "That's why I need help. It's my mom. She's not okay. She won't wake up right." Every instinct Jake had developed over 47 hard years of living told him to walk away. This wasn't his problem. He'd spent decades building walls precisely to avoid situations like this. Getting involved meant complications, and complications meant pain. Besides, what did he know about helping people? He was good at exactly two things, riding his bike and being left alone. But something in the kid's eyes stopped him from mounting his Harley and disappearing down the highway. It was a look he recognized because he'd worn it himself once, a long time ago. Desperation mixed with a fragile hope that anyone might actually give a damn. "How far?" he heard himself ask. "Just there." She pointed to a battered sedan parked in the far corner of the lot, partially hidden behind a dumpster. "Please, I've been asking people for 2 hours. Everyone just walks away." Jake's jaw tightened as he followed her across the sun-bleached asphalt. Of course they'd walked away. He'd probably have done the same thing just a few years ago, back when he was even harder, even more determined to prove he didn't need anyone, and nobody needed him. The little girl's hand slipped into his unexpectedly, her small fingers wrapping around two of his thick, scarred ones. The gesture was so trusting, so completely without fear, that it nearly broke something inside him he'd thought was long past breaking. When they reached the car, Jake peered through the window and his blood ran cold. A woman in her early 30s was slumped in the driver's seat, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing shallow and labored. The car's interior was a devastating snapshot of desperation, crumpled fast food wrappers, a duffel bag spilling clothes, and on the dashboard, an empty insulin pen. "She has diabetes," the little girl said quietly. "She ran out of her medicine 3 days ago. We've been living in the car since we got evicted. She said we just had to make it until Friday when her new job starts. But this morning she got confused and dizzy, and now she won't really wake up. I tried to get help, but everyone just looked scared of me because I'm dirty. Then I saw you, and I thought maybe someone who looks scary wouldn't be scared of a dirty kid. The logic was so pure, so heartbreakingly simple, that Jake had to look away for a moment. His hands were already pulling out his phone, dialing 911 with fingers that had broken bones and thrown punches but now trembled slightly as he gave the dispatcher their location. The little girl squeezed his hand tighter and he realized she was shaking. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling down to her level while they waited for the ambulance. "Emma. And that's my mama, Julie. We're going to be okay now, right? You're going to make sure we're okay?" The siren's wail grew louder in the distance. Jake swallowed hard against the unfamiliar tightness in his throat. "Yeah, kid. We're going to make sure." The paramedics arrived within minutes, and Jake watched as they worked quickly to stabilize Julie, starting an IV and checking her blood sugar levels. Emma clung to his hand the entire time, refusing to let go even when a kind-faced EMT tried to coax her into the ambulance. She only released him when Jake promised he'd follow them to the hospital. True to his word, Jake trailed the ambulance on his Harley through Phoenix traffic, his mind racing faster than his bike. At the hospital, he sat with Emma in the waiting room while doctors tended to her mother. The little girl finally fell asleep with her head against his arm, exhausted from fear and her 2-hour vigil of trying to find help. Jake sat perfectly still, afraid to wake her, this small person who'd seen him not as a monster but as someone capable of kindness. When the doctor finally emerged with good news Julie would make a full recovery, Jake felt something crack open inside his chest. Relief flooded through him, mixed with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Emma stirred and looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude that he didn't deserve. Over the next few days, as Julie recovered, Jake learned their story. A medical bankruptcy, lost jobs and lost housing. The desperate scramble to survive while trying to maintain dignity. They were good people struck by bad luck and an unforgiving system. And Emma had been brave enough to ask the one person. Everyone else was too afraid to approach. Jake made some calls, cashed in a few favors with brothers who knew brothers. He found Julie and Emma a place to stay, connected Julie with social services that could help, and even made sure her new employer knew she'd still be able to start on Friday, just as planned. When he visited them at their new temporary apartment, bringing groceries and a stuffed bear for Emma, Julie broke down crying. "Why are you doing this?" she asked through her tears. "You don't even know us." Jake looked at Emma, who was hugging her new bear and smiling at him like he'd hung the moon. He thought about all the times he'd needed help and been too proud or too scared to ask. He thought about all the times people had crossed the street to avoid him, never knowing that beneath the leather, and Scars was just a man trying to make sense of a world that had never been particularly kind. "Because someone had to," he said finally. "And your daughter was brave enough to believe I could be that someone." As Jake rode away from their apartment that evening, the setting sun painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, he realized something fundamental had shifted. For years, he'd worn his appearance like armor, pushing people away before they could hurt him. But Emma had seen past all of that to something he'd forgotten was there, his humanity. His phone buzzed with a text from Julie. "Emma wants to know if you'll come to dinner next week. She says you're her hero. Honestly, you're mine too. Thank you for proving that angels come in unexpected forms." Jake pulled over to the side of the road. His vision blurring as tears he hadn't shed in 20 years finally broke free. He'd spent so long being the person. Everyone feared that he'd forgotten he could also be the person someone needed. A 7-year-old girl with dirty clothes and worn-out shoes had reminded him that kindness isn't about how you look or where it's about showing up when someone asks for help, even when every part of you wants to walk away. He texted back a simple, "I'll be there," then sat for a moment longer, letting the desert wind dry his tears. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled against the dimming sky, and Jake felt lighter than he had in years. Emma had asked a Hell's Angel for help, and what he'd discovered in that moment, his own capacity for compassion, his own worthiness of trust, had changed everything. Sometimes salvation doesn't look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like a little girl brave enough to see the hero in the monster, and a man broken enough to finally let himself be seen.